This is Lawsuit Legal, and today we're talking about construction accidents in New York City and if or why injuries and fatalities are growing. First, let's look at the data. According to a New York City citywide performance report, construction-related injuries and fatalities in New York City rose 34% from 211 injuries in 2011 to 283 injuries in 2015. Additional data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics show that there were 78 fatal occupational injuries in New York City in 2014. Of these 78 fatalities, 25 resulted from violence and other injuries by persons or animals, and 20 from falls, slips, and trips. Together, these two major categories accounted for more than half of the city's workplace fatalities. Other major event categories each reported 14 or fewer deaths. Fatal work injuries from violence and other injuries by persons or animals included 12 suicides and 11 homicides, with the counts in both categories up over the year. In the falls, slips, or trips category, 19 deaths were the result of falls to a lower level, an increase of 6 over the year. Transportation incidents were the most frequent fatal workplace event in 2014 throughout the entire United States and accounted for 40% of the fatal workplace injuries. The second most frequent type of workplace fatality nationally was related to falls, slips, or trips and accounted for 17% of work-related fatalities. Violence and other injuries by persons or animals accounted for 16% of workplace fatalities nationwide, and contact with objects and equipment accounted for 15% of fatalities. When it came to New York City, violence and other injuries by persons or animals accounted for 30% of work fatalities, and contact with objects and equipment accounted for only 10%. Some other data to point out: the construction industry in New York City had the highest fatality count with 22 deaths, 14 of those being from falls, slips, or trips. Construction and extraction occupations had the highest number of fatal work injuries. 41% of those who died from workplace-related injuries were of Hispanic or Latino origin, and 54% of the city's work-related injuries in 2014 were from workers aged 25 through 54. The question still remains, though: what could contribute to the unusually high number of fatal construction accidents in New York City? Attorney Adam Russell had this to say: "In my opinion, it's a function of two things. First, the real estate market is very hot right now in New York City, and so there's a lot of development going on. Downtown is back. On the other side of the equation, because the real estate environment is so competitive, there is an enormous pressure on developers to get their projects done quickly and under budget. So what should you do if you've just been hurt on your construction site? The first thing you should do is dial 911 to report the incident. Next step is to get examined by an independent medical professional. After you're examined, you should go document the site where the accident happened. The best way to document the incident is through pictures or video of the scene, including anything that can show how dangerous, chaotic, or dirty the scene was at the time of the accident. Also point out anything that may have broken or been damaged before or during the accident, as it is not uncommon for these items to be removed from a job site if an incident has occurred. If you are a pedestrian and was hit by fallen debris, you should immediately call 911 and request medical attention. Just like if you are a worker, you or someone you can trust should document the scene as quickly as possible, preferably with pictures or video, to showcase the scene of the accident. Once that is done, the next step should be to call your lawyer. What happens if you were a worker and the cause of your accident was your fault? It actually depends on the situation. For example, if you are in a strict liability situation, such as a height-related risk, if something falls on you or you fall from a height, your contribution to the accident is irrelevant in the eyes of the law. If you disobeyed a direct order, however, this can change. If you were given direct orders to not do something and you disobeying that direct order led to your injury, then you can be at fault for the accident. In situations where it's not a height-related situation and an injury occurs, your negligence is taken into consideration. However, that doesn't completely disbar you from the possibility of a recovery for your injury. Now, what happens if you are injured on a job site but do not want to sue your employer? Do you have any other options in terms of compensation? The good news is that by law, you would not be suing your employer, as there are other entities on a construction site that are responsible and statutorily liable in certain situations. This could be the property owner, the general contractor, or other subcontractors on the job site. Other at-fault persons could be the architect or the equipment manufacturers of the tools being used on the job site, and retrofitters who change equipment after it leaves the factory. Let's say you are a tourist visiting New York City and you are involved in an incident with a falling object by a job site. In this case, you should absolutely contact and work with a local lawyer, even though you may live out of the city or state. The attorney handling the case must be admitted where the accident occurred, where the lawsuit is getting filed, and you want someone who will know the ins and outs of the local laws and courts. Another odd situation could involve a worker who was injured, however they weren't officially working, weren't at fault, and shouldn't have been there at the time of the incident. An example of this would be an undocumented worker on a job site. In these cases, you do have rights as an immigrant to the United States, regardless of your status. What does a law firm do in a construction company claim? The law firm you hired will more than likely do the following: dispatch an investigator to the scene of the accident, pull the permits from the Department of Buildings, identify and interview any witnesses of the accident, hire expert witnesses to support claims, work to ensure the client's medical bills and wages are getting paid, and make sure that the client's insurance paperwork is filled out and filed properly so that the claim process runs as smoothly as possible. If you've been involved in a construction site related incident, you should contact a lawyer to see if you are eligible for financial compensation.